I got the opportunity to go to Yosemite Valley, beautiful national park. You drive in through this tunnel, and literally it was like Jurassic Park music playing in my head of how beautiful this place is. It's John Muir, the founder, not really the founder, but he's the one who lobbied to President Teddy Roosevelt to develop the national parks. When he first discovered Yosemite, he described it as this is what heaven looked like. And I'd have to say that I agree. I got to spend 4 days there with my wife this past week, and I love just getting to spend that kind of quality time with my wife. And she asked me a question that kind of bothered me. She said, "What's the most miraculous thing you've ever seen God do?" It actually wasn't the question that bothered me. It was how long it took me to answer it. That should have been right at the front of my brain, what I thought the most miraculous thing was that God had ever done. And I found I've seen so many miracles in my life and in other people's life. I really had to think about it for a little while. And it's great that I've got, different stories in my life of things that I've experienced. But what bothered me is I sat there thinking about it for a while, and I gave her an answer. But what bothered me deeply is that it wasn't just extremely evident to me, the most miraculous thing that I'd ever seen God do. It's so easy for us to forget what God has done in our lives. We're coming up on Monday. It's going to be Memorial Day. Memorial Day is a day to remember. It's a day to honor the people that have died serving this country. If you don't know where it came from, it was started in 1868, right after the Civil War. Going back from now all the way to the Revolutionary War, it's about 1.2 million people who have died serving this country. It's like 650,000 of those were the Civil War. AT&T Stadium is 80,000 people. So the next time you go to AT&T Stadium, just think about that. And for every single seat in the stadium, there's 15 people sitting in that seat that have died serving this country. Right? The AT&T, if a bomb just went off in AT&T Stadium and killed 1,000 people, that would be a travesty. Right? But think about that. For every single seat in AT&T Stadium, there's 15 people that have died serving this country. And half of those were in the Civil War. And so in 1868, right after the Civil War, they had this day where one of the generals said, let's have this day that we honor all the people that have died serving this country. And the presidential proclamation that wrote Memorial Day into existence, it said, let us remember and let us pray for lasting peace. And it just shook me, that question that my wife asked me, that it wasn't just very strong in my memory what the most miraculous thing that God had ever done was. It's so easy for us to forget. I want you to think about some of the things that you've forgotten before. I know I've made mistakes. I've forgotten things. We've forgotten birthdays. We've forgotten anniversaries. We've forgotten that thing that we didn't think was important, but once we forgot it, our wife told us that it was extremely important. I think every single married man is guilty of that at some point in their life. And I'd like to believe I have a strong memory, and I still forget things. I want you to begin to see forgetfulness as a sin. Because something my dad said to me when I was little, he said, ignorance is no excuse of the law. You can't tell a police officer, my bad, I didn't know. It gives you no credit. So think about some of the things that you've forgotten. I think about my friend Charlie Keating, who died May 3rd, 2016, and he was someone who mentored me, who's someone who spoke into my life, and I'll remember him till the day that I die. But think about some of the things that are meaningful and significant to you and how awful it would be if you forgot those things. When you forget, it's kind of bliss, isn't it? Like if you forget, it's no big deal to you, but the crime is still there. Think about some of the wonderful, special things. And again, this is what bothered me about that question my wife asked me. It bothered me that I even became close to forgetting some of the incredible things that God has done in my life. Think about some of the most special things that you've ever experienced. Most of us who've had children, you'll probably never forget that experience. But think about how sad it would be if you did forget. What if you forgot what it had been like to hold your child for the first time? And if you'll take that moment or just some other special moment in your life and think about what it would be to forget those things, you'll begin to put a different weight on how terrible forgetfulness can be. And so in light of Memorial Day, I want to talk about forgetfulness. There's a book, you guys hear me say all the time, only have to be told once, have to be reminded many times. Maybe you don't know this, but the book of Deuteronomy in the Bible, the word Deuteronomy, it's a Greek word that essentially means second law. Okay? We talk about the story of Israelites leaving Egypt all the time. So you have Exodus and Leviticus, which is that story, and Moses giving the law. 40 years later, before the new generation is about to go into the promised land, this is the book of Deuteronomy. Moses gives all of the laws again. A couple things are added, but Deuteronomy is the book of it's called the second law, because Moses says all of the same things again to the new generation. And something that's really interesting, I didn't know this until I began to look at it, look deeper at Deuteronomy, because what I'm going to talk about today and what the title of my message is Never Forget. But when you look at the book of Deuteronomy, I found this very fascinating. It says remember in Deuteronomy 14 times. It says never forget in Deuteronomy 14 times. 14 is the number of salvation and liberation, right? And so your freedom, the life that you're supposed to have, if you forget God's law, if you forget everything he's spoken to you, if you forget what he's done in your life, you will be exactly like the Israelites, the first generation, who forgot. And because they forgot what God had done, because they forgot what God had said, they missed their destiny. And so I wanted to just paint this picture, certainly as we're on the doorstep of Memorial Day, how important it is to never forget. But so much more important than remembering every single soldier who's died serving this country is that you would remember what God has said. So I'm going to give you 4 things. My message today is going to be short. I'm going to give you 4 things from the book of Deuteronomy that we must never forget. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9. Only be on your guard and diligently watch yourselves so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen and so that they do not slip from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and grandchildren. Moses isn't saying this as a suggestion. The generation before all died because they forgot. So again, I'm trying to paint a picture for you. If you have any takeaway from today, I hope your takeaway will be that forgetting is dangerous. Moses is saying this to all of these young men and these young ladies who are listening, I'm sure, and saying, if you forget, this is what happened to your fathers. They forgot, and it got them killed. So don't forget these things. When we forget what God has done in our lives, we lose the power to grow. All of this story, all of the great things that God has done in your life, see it as the foundation. When you get older and you reach the destiny that God has for your life, and I'm prophesying over you that you would meet that end, right? That when you get older and you reach the destiny that God has for your life, it's what I want for every single one of you, that you would reach that destiny. When you get older and you reach that place and you look back at your life, here's exactly what you'll see. Those of you who meet that place, and I hope you all do. You'll look back at your life and you'll see every single stone and step that God carried you, that God helped you, that he opened doors for you, that he did things that you could never do on your own. If you don't see those things, I promise you're not moving forward. You're taking laps. It's exactly what the Israelites did. They'd forgotten what God had done. And so let me read this scripture again, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9. Be on your guard and diligently watch yourselves so that you do not forget. Think about that. Be on guard and watch yourself so you don't forget. That means, like Pastor Keith has taught us, to be intentional, to be aware. If you just think you're going to naturally remember everything, you're wrong. You will remember things. I learned a painful lesson in the military. You know, I think it's just part of being 19 and 20. Where are my 19 and 20-year-olds at? And there's a few in the room. God bless you guys. I hope you're more humble than I was at 20 years old. Because when I was 20 years old, I thought I was really, really smart. And I was brand new at SEAL Team 3. And there's this guy in my platoon who was, I would just say, the nicest way I could say it, he's the other side of smart. They said in the SEAL teams you had to either be smart or hard. And this guy carried all of the extra weight and the machine gun. So I'll just leave it at that. And I'd been doing really well at SEAL Team 3 for a few months. But then I screwed something up. And my chief called me into his office to reprimand me because I had made a mistake. And the mistake it wasn't a difficult task that he had asked me to do. He had asked me to do about 20 things, and I did 19 of them. And the one thing that I had forgotten, we didn't talk about the 19 that I got right. We spent about 15 minutes of me just sitting there taking a verbal assaulting of why I'd forgotten the one thing. And I remember that same day, the guy who was the knuckle dragger, who carried the machine gun and all the extra weight, he had done that thing. And it occurred to me, doesn't matter how smart you are, doesn't matter how strong your memory is, a notepad will always have a better memory than you will have. And so I bring up that story. It's a story I'll probably always remember because I got humbled that day. But I bring up that story as a reminder of one of the ways that you can remember things. Why don't you go ahead and document some of the defining moments in your life? Why don't you go ahead and write down some of the miracles? Again, that question that my wife asked me, it bothered me. That it was not right at the front of my mind, all of the miraculous things that I've seen God do. So I've started putting some of them in an Evernote, and now every time I think of new ones, because I think there's probably some that I've forgotten, which deeply bothers me, honestly, that God's done miraculous things in my life, and I can't think of all of them. So why don't you write down all of the things that God has done in your life, all the ways that he's moved on your behalf? Because like I said, this memory of what God's done, this is the first thing I'm telling you to never forget. Never forget what God's done in your life. See this as a foundation in your ability to move forward. If you'll remember all the things that God has done, that's how you'll continue to grow forward. When you see this when you reach your destiny at the end of your life, it will be because you can look back and see all the ways that God has moved on your behalf, all the times God has performed miracles, all the times he opened a door that you were begging for. And this is Louis Zamperini's story. If most of you guys, who read Unbroken a couple years ago, a good chunk of you guys, we all read Unbroken together. If you remember his story, he was, I can't even take me all an hour to tell you all of Louis Zamperini's story. Went through crazy atrocity after atrocity. When he was on the raft, when he's in the prison camp, he prayed and said, God, if you'll get me out of this, I'll dedicate my life to you. Well, one day he finally does get out of it. And he goes home. And he's angry, depressed. His wife's about to divorce him, and they go to a Billy Graham message. And he walks out the first time, but his wife gets saved. And she says, okay, you know what? I'm not going to divorce you anymore. And Louis says, okay, you know what? I'll go back with you to the next Billy Graham crusade, but I'm going to get up and leave right after the message. And what Billy said, that second message, reminded Louis that he had forgotten his promise to God. And when Louis remembered the promise that he'd made to God, when Louis remembered all the ways that God had saved him over and over and over, if you don't know this, Louis wrote his own memoir, and his title of the memoir was Devil on Your Heels. So that's how Louis lived a decade of his life, with the devil right behind him. And Louis can tell a great story in his life of how God saved him over and over and over again. His story is incredible. I don't know if I could forget his story, but Louis came home and he forgot his story, until Billy Graham's message reminded him of all God had done and the promise that he made. And that's when Louis found his real destiny. He spent the rest of his life ministering to people, telling his story, and leading people to Christ. That's the power of remembering what God's done, and that's the emptiness of forgetting what God's done in your life. So that's the first thing. Never forget what God has done. Number 2, remember the promise. So all God's done, your testimony, that's a foundation. The promises of God, these are a guide in our life. Deuteronomy 4:23, just a few verses later. Be careful that you do not forget the covenant of the Lord your God that he made with you. Do not make an idol for yourselves in the form of anything he has forbidden you. A lot of us, if you read this story of the Israelites, and Moses is up on the mountain, and the Israelites get like 5 minutes to themselves, and they start making like golden calves and worshiping them. It sounds stupid. We're all just as stupid. Don't fool yourselves into thinking you're any different. Every single one of us has gone to church on a Sunday morning, heard a fantastic message from Pastor Keith, or something that's moved you, and then you go home that afternoon and you haven't changed. You go home that afternoon, you go right back to your God, which is your alcohol, your porn, whatever it is. And I'm no different because we've all had them. So don't think that we're any different than them. But this scripture, Deuteronomy 4:23, is don't forget. Do not make any idols. Don't let anything come between you and me. God wants you to, you know what idols will do for you? They will lead you astray. God is saying, I don't want you to have these other things in your life, because if you put me in the number 2 spot, you'll blink and I'll be in the number 10. You put me in the number 2 spot, that thing that's number 1, I promise you, anything else that you would put before me, this is what God says, it defies me. And so you can't have God in the number 2 spot ever in your life. If he's in the number 2, it's basically like you don't know him at all. That's what he says. It's what Jesus says. If you don't hate your mother, that's what Jesus said. If you don't hate your mother and your father, if you don't hate your brother and your sister, your wife and your own children, you can't follow me. And that word hate, it's not in my notes. That word hate is miseo, which means to prefer something over another. Right? That hate is when he's saying, when you hate your brother, or you hate your father, you hate your sister, this is a scripture that can sound very contrary to what the Bible talks about. Because the Bible says, obey your parents. New Testament says, love your neighbor. But then Jesus also said, if you don't hate your father, hate your mother, you can't follow me. He's saying by hate, if you put them before me, you hate me. God wants to be number 1 in your life. And you know what the power of this is? When you put God in the number 1 spot, when you make him your priority, this is the power of priorities. Some of you guys who listen to my podcast, you hear me talk about the essentialness of priorities. If you got 7 things in your life and they're all important, that's great. But none of them are going to work out until you realize what is the number 1 thing. What is most important? The most important thing in every single one of our lives, if you're here and you like the message that we talk about, which is the message of Christ, then you need to make Christ number 1 in your life. For all of you that are married, your wife should be number 2. And then you can kind of sort out your own priorities after that, right? But number 1 is God in your life. And if you don't make him number 1, if you think you can get away with him being number 2, that will show you how messed up your life will be when you're like, well, you know what makes me vomit? When men talk about balance. I just need more balance in my life. I'm the most unbalanced person I know. I'm extremely unbalanced, and I'm happy to say that. My life is very unbalanced and weighted towards following God. My life is very unweighted and unbalanced towards honoring my family, towards serving God, towards living a life of advancing him. You don't need a life of balance. Man, how do I do all these different things? That's what it feels like to be torn in different directions. When you know what your priorities are, you know what's most important in your life. And this second thing that I'm giving you, to never forget, to always remember to put God first. That's what this is about. If you have anything else that starts to leak into the number 1 spot, and it's easy, I'll show you how easy it is. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. There's very few of you in this room, I just know, who have a written list of these are my priorities. This is my number 1. This is my number 2. This is my number 3. And if you don't have that, it's based on your feelings, right? Because what'll become your number 1 priority is the thing that's yelling at you the most, the thing that's pulling on you the most, right? Maybe you know for sure, like God's my number 1, but if you're not clear on all these other priorities, then some things will become a number 1 priority in the wrong season, in the wrong time. And that's why God is teaching us a lesson in this. He's saying, 1, you need to love me most or you won't understand anything else. He's also teaching us the wisdom and the power of priorities, that when you put God first, you understand how priorities work. If you'll put me first, then you can, it doesn't like sound nice to say to your wife, hey, sorry, you're my number 2. Right? And that's a malicious form of kindness, by the way. It's a malicious form of care, that your care is, I want people to feel good. Think about that. Right? I won't tell people what the truth is, because that might hurt their feelings. And you might think I'm messing around, but I'm not. That can lead you down a very wrong road. You know what? My wife knows she's number 2, and it's okay for us to talk about that. And maybe that sounds simple to you. What's your 3rd priority? What's your 4th priority? What's your 5th priority? My business is not 1, 2, or 3 of my priorities in my life, right? That doesn't mean I want to fail at my business. I don't want to fail at anything. But I know where I would rather fail. And I would rather fail in my business than fail in my marriage. I would rather fail in my business than fail in my walk with God. And so they're all important to me. It's why they're on my list of priorities. But I can say to my business, you're not number one. And if you're not clear on your priorities, your business will pull at you and it will become number one in your life. And that's when you get your life out of order. And that's why God is saying, that's why Moses is bringing this up in Deuteronomy. Don't let things come before me, because I'll walk away for 5 minutes, says Moses, and you'll start worshiping other things. And that's how easy it is for every single one of us to begin to worship other things. That's why it says, never forget this. Know what your priorities are. Number 3, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 12. Be careful not to forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Number 3 is about remembering his power. Remember the power of who God is. This is fear of the Lord. This is also humility. Let me read it again, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 12. Be careful not to forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. If the Israelites would just remember how God saved them from Egypt and how he punished Egypt for their disobedience, it would have reminded them to honor God. Think about this. They were a few weeks into the desert and they had forgotten what slavery felt like. They were only remembering this delusion in their mind of the food and the pleasures of Egypt. Literally, if you read the story, the Israelites get into Egypt, they're a few weeks into the desert, and they start missing Egypt. That's how delusional your memory can be for you. They'd been enslaved for generations and generations, crying out to God to be liberated. God liberates them. They're a few weeks into the desert with God, providing for them over and over again, performed over 40 miracles from the time that God first speaks to Moses to the time they cross the Red Sea. And they're a few weeks into the desert, and the Israelites start saying, man, Egypt was nice. That's how foolish we can all be, that you would look back and you would miss really what happened into your story. But more importantly, that you would remember the power of who God is. I promise you, the Israelites, if they'd been thinking like, man, do you remember what God did to Pharaoh? God sent Moses to Pharaoh to tell him to let us go. And Pharaoh had the audacity to say no to God. And look what God did to Pharaoh. Look what God did to the Egyptians. If the Israelites had remembered that, if they had remembered the power of who God is, this is part of fear of the Lord. There is a fear of the Lord, which is an understanding of his greatness. There's also a fear of the Lord, which is a form of terror, which is an understanding that he's the creator of the universe, that he spoke it into motion and he can speak it out of existence immediately, right? An understanding of who God is. The greatness is that we have God the Father and we have God the Son who loves us, makes a way for us that we can have relationship with God the Father. But the Israelites lost their respect for God. That's kind of a simpler way of putting it. They had complacency with God and they lost their respect for him. And that's why it was so easy for them to disobey him. Right? The wise thing to do is, this was some of the lesson of my own life. When I was a young teenager, I watched my sister get in a lot of trouble. I watched her get lots of beatings, watched her get locked in her room, get her car taken away, lose just about every privilege because she was disobedient and disrespectful. And that was probably the strongest side of my father I had seen at that point. And you know what I did? I said, you know what? I don't want, whatever that is, I don't want that. That's not good. Benjamin Franklin said, a wise man learns from his mistakes. A wiser man learns from the mistakes of others. And this is the lesson that the Israelites should have learned. They saw what God did to Egypt because they didn't listen. And if they had remembered this, they wouldn't have made some of those own mistakes. I hope you look back at your life and see the mercy of who God is. Because I've made so many mistakes that I was not punished for. But because of humility, because of fear of the Lord, that's why I'm afraid to get away from God. That's why I'm afraid to get God out of the number one spot in my life. That's why I'm afraid that when God speaks and I don't listen, that I don't ever want to do that. Don't forget the power of who God is. If you forget this, this is the beginning of a dangerous road of not respecting the power of God, and you walk into a dark place, and I promise you are in for a beating. So never forget the power of who God is in your life. And what this creates is humility. Quoted this scripture last week, but it's God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. And that's a place that you can never overcome. Doesn't matter how strong you are, how tough you are. God resists the proud. You think you can overcome God resisting you? You can't. You will stay stuck there forever. You'll never get out of that place. But God gives grace to the humble. And if you'll remember who God is, if you'll remember the power of who God is, that'll create humility in your life, and that's where you get grace. And I promise, grace is way better than God resisting you. And let me give you the number 4. Remember his commands. Deuteronomy 8, verse 11. Be careful not to forget. I hope you're catching in all of these scriptures. It says, don't forget. Be careful not to forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his commandments and ordinances and statutes, which I am giving you this day. God's commands, they're the greatest strength that we can have. An immature view of God's commands, and we've all looked this way. I remember when I was 13 years old in church, and they're like, don't masturbate, don't look at porn, don't drink alcohol, don't have sex with your girlfriend. And it's all these things that you're not supposed to do that kind of sound interesting when you're 13 years old. Like, man, I don't know. Maybe. When you're 13 years old, you want to do all those things. And those laws and those statutes, they don't seem like freedom. When you grow up, when you mature, when you've seen the dark side of what Proverbs talks about, when you follow the adulterous woman and you see what kind of life you get, that's when you realize what God's law actually is, that it's freedom. It's truth. Romans 8, verse 7, for the mind that is set on the flesh, 13-year-old me, is hostile to God. But it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Right? The flesh is hostile to God's law. But the law, God's law, when you see it this way, when you understand that God's law is the truth, you realize this is freedom. This is what you want in your life. John 8:32, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You think like my dad said to me, ignorance is no excuse of the law. Tell the police officer you forgot what the rules were. See how that works out. No, your best chance is to ask for mercy. Officer, I know the law, and I willingly broke it, and I'm sorry. That is the best chance you got of getting out of a ticket. You think forgetting the law is going to give you freedom? You will find nothing but destruction. When you know God's law and you know his commandments, you understand that it's the truth, that is the power you have to have freedom in your life. Because so many of you in this room who are walking in true freedom, you're walking in the Spirit of the Lord, you know that it comes from understanding God's word, that it comes from understanding God's law. And so in all of this, I'm going to wrap up here. Deuteronomy is just a reminder. All I'm giving, I didn't teach you anything new today. I'm giving you reminders. Don't forget these things. If you forget, there's a penalty. There's no grace for your forgetfulness. And you should begin to see forgetfulness in your life as something that's horrible and to stay away from. Like it says, it's Deuteronomy 4:23. Be careful that you do not forget not that one. Deuteronomy 4, verse 9. Only be on your guard and diligently watch yourself so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen. We need to be on guard. You need to watch yourself. That means it's your responsibility. It's not somebody else's responsibility for you to remember. I'm trying to help you remember. I'm giving you reminders. The entire book of Deuteronomy was Moses giving the Israelites a reminder 40 years later. Hey, I said this already. I'm going to say it again. Your parents forgot, got them killed. Do not forget these things. So remember your testimony. Remember what God has done in your life. That's the foundation. If you remember what God's done in your life and you get to the end of your life, you're going to see those things. You're going to look back and say, this is where God opened this door. This is the time, like Louis Zamperini, that I prayed that prayer and I said, God, if you'll just do this thing, if you'll just save me, if you'll just save my business, if you'll just save my marriage, I'll dedicate my life to you. Remember those things. Remember the promises of God. When you see the promises of God in your life, that's your trusted God. You know what? When I was going through SEAL training, Romans 8:28 was a promise to me. For those who love God, all things work out for the good. When I was going through the most difficult moment in my life, one of the most difficult moments in my life, and I realized there's no way I can get out of this. I don't have the strength. I don't have the ability to get through this. I thought on this scripture and I thought, you know what? The only way out for me is that I trust in God. Because when you try to control everything, you're focused on one outcome, right? This is when you know, by the way, that you're doing it your way and not God's way, when you only see one way. This is the only outcome that I'm interested in, that's when you're doing it your way. But when I was going through the most difficult circumstances in my life and I realized I don't have the strength or the ability to control this outcome, I said, God, I love you. I want your way. And if this is what you want for my life, this is what I want. And if I'm not supposed to make it through this program, then I love you and it's going to be for good. I'm not trying to make it through on my own strength. I'm not trying to prove anything to God. I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody. God, I want your way in my life. And so that's what the promises are. Remember the promises of who God is. Remember the promises of what God says. This is your guide through difficult times. Remember the power of who God is. This becomes humility in your life. And remember his commands. This is where freedom comes from. Understanding God's word and understanding God's law. Let me pray for us, and then I'll give the question for the groups. Heavenly Father, we honor you and we